I mean, to me, these people who are willing to speak up, even though it disrupts their lives so much, I'm just so in awe of them. Maureen is one of them. So Maureen and her husband Matt live on Friday Harbor. Most of you will know where that is. It's on San Juan Island, just a little town. Mostly people just take a ferry out there and enjoy it. Very touristy area, but it's a small community. Well, Maureen and Matt, they had kids and they had a daughter who was just, making her way up there in years in high school. And they started to realize that, like, there's an awful lot of kids and teens, even in our daughter's inner circle, who believe that they're transgender. And they, so much so that Maureen and Matt took note of it. And they're like, gosh, this is odd. And it wasn't just, changing their pronouns. It was teens who were going through medical intervention to change their gender. So Maureen talked a little bit about just what she was starting to notice.
The first time it really hit me was when I was aware of about, I think she was 14 or 15, and she was going through full transition to be a man, and was taking the hormones and had her breasts removed. And I just thought to myself, wow, that's a lot that for a young person to do at this age. And I started wondering, like, about how that happened or what kind of support, I just started realizing and noticing as another year or two went along that we had a lot of support for transitioning. Honestly, for me also personally, one day the girls were coming down the alley to the house and I said, hey girls, and this is, 4 years ago or something. And they said, hey girls, and I said, you can't call us that anymore. And I go, really? I go, well, what can I call you? And they said, you can call us guys, and I was like, okay. So I was one of those parents who was slowly getting told the new way of things, the new way of talking, the new way of dealing with things. And I tried it first and I was going along pretty well. But after the young person had gone through the surgery, I was like, ooh, that I just was starting to wonder. And then I started noticing another young person had their breasts removed. And I was like, what's going on? I actually asked my daughter, I was kind of being silly, but I just said, okay, Lucy, I said, you have, a large circle of friends who are transgender. I said, are you going to stay my daughter? And she just kind of rolled her eyes at me and she knows I'm being silly, but she goes, yeah, probably.
So Maureen and Matt could have left it at that, right? They could have just said, that's weird. And as long as it's not happening to our daughter, no big deal. And besides, they'd already been sort of vilified in their community in Friday Harbor because Maureen, this is kind of a funny story. It's totally a tangent, but she didn't wear a mask in a grocery store at some point, like one of the only grocery stores. And actually there's only two and they're owned by the same people, banned her. So she was like left without a grocery store. So she's already like, well, half the town hates me. It's super liberal. So I might as well do something about this too. So Maureen and Matt decided to invite to Friday Harbor a detransitioner, a 23-year-old, now 23-year-old named Nicolas Blooms. And they said, we're going to bring Nicolas here and he can just give kids a different perspective. We'll host an event where he can speak and kids and parents can just hear this perspective of someone who started the process of transitioning from a boy to a girl and decided this was a mistake and transitioned back and talk about what he went through. Well, the local LGBTQ community on Friday Harbor did not like that very much. And they started pushing back, vilifying Maureen and Matt, and getting the event canceled. Not one venue, but two venues canceled Nicolas's appearance at the very last minute, to the point where he'd already flown in to talk to the community. And so at one point, he ends up speaking to folks on a sidewalk in front of the Grange after the Grange canceled his appearance. But even after, some angry activist adults in Friday Harbor got his venues canceled, they still showed up. This 23-year-old talking about his personal experience in dealing with this. They still showed up outside the Grange to harass him there on the sidewalk. Here's Maureen talking about that happening.
And it did hurt his feelings. Part of the reason that he felt he was trans was part of the reason why he had internal trauma was he was bullied as a child for being different. When they told him to go back to Chicago and they were so mean to him, I feel like it did hurt. It did hurt his feelings, but he's a strong person, so he's really understanding of like, that's not my pain. And he actually has healed himself from gender dysphoria. he was speaking about how we should love ourselves. He spoke to all of us. When he spoke to all of us with negative self-talk. He spoke to all of us who have, different kinds of issues. And he wasn't just speaking about one particular kind of gender dysphoria. It's just, like love yourself. He said, my legs are beautiful. My arms are beautiful. Thank you, arms, for being here. Thank you, legs, for being here to carry me through life, and things like that. And his message was beautiful. But it did hurt his feelings. I felt ashamed of our community members.
Yeah, and when you think about that, you as an adult, you can choose just not to show up. You could choose like, hey, there's this detransitioner that's going to speak at the Grange. I'm not going to go because I don't want to hear about that. I don't believe in that. But to say, I don't want to hear it so no one else can hear it, no one else can hear a message that I disagree with, that's where we are as a society. I agree with her. That's shameful of community members in Friday Harbor. To try to silence this young man who went through something very, very challenging and who is willing now to talk about it. And you don't want anyone to hear it. And you show up and you harass him with signs and with chants and jeers. What's wrong with you? You're adults. I mean, at what point do you realize that your ideology has taken over every fiber of your being and stopped you from thinking clearly? You don't have to agree with him, but let him talk to people who want to hear what he has to say. So anyway, on Sundays with Subscribers, not only do we talk to Maureen, who, man, I love Maureen. I'm sure I would have loved Matt too. He was fishing, I think, or something, and so Matt couldn't join Maureen. But I just so admire their commitment to what they believe in and to trying to get people to think about other perspectives. So anyway, we also got a chance on Sundays with Subscribers to have a long conversation with Nicolas about what he went through, medically and emotionally. And it was so eye-opening. I stopped him at various points in the interview and said, Nicolas, I've got goosebumps everywhere. A lot of what he talked about was hard to hear, very detailed, graphic, sort of what he went through sexually as a young man, taking gender hormones. And it's difficult to listen to, but it's stuff you've got to hear because it's so rare to hear that from a first-person perspective. But I asked him toward the end of our interview what advice he would give to young people who, like him, maybe are feeling influenced through social media, that they might be transgender.
Turn your phone off. I think that's the biggest social contagion is during the pandemic, people were on their phones all day long. So they were like, oh my God, there's nothing better to do than change my gender. That's the most exciting thing. Let's dye my hair. Let's chop my hair. It's just be yourself without doing all those things. You don't need medicalization. You don't need surgeries to be yourself. It's like people have lost their selves. They have lost being human. And I'm like, turn your phones off. That's where we start. That's how we become connected to our bodies. That's how we relax our minds. That's how we can find ourselves again. When we turn our phones off.
Well, that's a good advice for most people. I think so many societal issues, we talk about the crime crisis and young people all the time, and it's like, they're playing Grand Theft Auto and, they're just disconnected from reality. And then just for parents, what is something your parents did that other parents might be able to do that can help a young person through this time in their lives?
I feel like if they're probably in their teen years, I would say really push back from the gender thing. Don't call them by their chosen name. Call them by a pet name if they have one. If it's just probably they just want things to be shifted. They just want something different. But don't call them by their preferred pronouns. Don't call them by the chosen name, just because that's just continuing to affirm a lie. We want to ground them in the truth and then smother them with love. They probably feel uncomfortable. They probably feel not loved. So maybe it's more like have dinner together. I feel like families aren't connecting together anymore. And I think it's a lot of tension in the family, and maybe learning and discovering new ways where you can connect and have pauses and maybe cook dinner together. Find something new together that you can do so that you can step away from gender, because I feel like a lot of parents are just so focused on gender, but it's just like they need a pause too. like together to have different memories than just yelling at each other. Let's pause and go out for a walk in nature. Let's just declutter all this so that we can actually be grounded when we have a conversation.
I mean, how good of advice is that? Seriously, you can watch our full interview with Nicolas and Maureen on yesterday's episode of Sundays with Subscribers at undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. You can sign up for just $5 a month. On Sundays, we always try to have these kind of unique, in-depth interviews on important issues. Man, I'll just say about Nicolas, one of the things that he spoke about that I think it touched me the most was how much better his relationship is with his parents now that he's detransitioned. And not because like they hated him or something, but because he's so much happier in his body, being a boy as he was born, that it just improved the relationship he had with his parents. And he was going through so much mentally and emotionally, and it really was brainwashing through YouTube videos that were sort of, he'd watched a couple on with influencers who were trans, and then it just started, the algorithm just started putting those in his timeline over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where he was brainwashed into believing that he needed medical intervention. And look, I am not telling parents how to parent. I don't want to do that. But there is another side to this out there, and the media will never talk about it. The mainstream media, even platforming a detransitioner is dangerous for us, certainly, which is crazy to think about. But whenever, to vilify a kid who went through it and wants to talk about it on the back end, and to suggest that that voice isn't relevant, that that voice isn't important, is insane to me. If your kid's going through this, go, as you would with anything, right? Any sort of, if your child had cancer, and, a doctor prescribed a certain sort of diet or a certain sort of path forward for care, wouldn't you go and research, do a little research on your own and say, well, here's that person's experience and here's this person's experience? You do it with anything else. Why would you not do it if your child is saying that they want to switch genders? I mean, again, it's just crazy. So we so appreciate Nicolas coming on with us and telling his story. And the speaking event he was supposed to do on Friday Harbor community, I'm sure some of you are great, but the rest of you, shame on you. Shame on you. That was his first speaking event ever. It's not like he's some sort of like nationally recognized detransitioner who's been on all the big shows and podcasts. That was the first time he was ever going to speak to people about his experience. And that's how the community of Friday Harbor welcomed him. Shameful stuff. Truly, truly unbelievable.